So yesterday was one of the most surreal and greatest days in Command & Conquer history. It seems that totally out of the blue and without any pre-warning, Electronic Arts not only released a new official patch for Generals Zero Hour, yeah, you heard that correct, which is patch 1.05, but they also released some old archival footage from the early engine development of the Sage engine, and they also enabled Steam Workshop support for 5 C&C games, including Zero Hour. But then we have the biggest thing of all. They only went and released the source code for Generals Zero Hour, plus 3 other C&C games. So C&C Tiberian Dawn, C&C Red Alert, and C&C Renegade. So you can find more information about this over on Reddit with a post from Jim. Basically, the main man who drove this forward, and who we owe a huge thanks to, is a guy who goes by the name of CC Hyper, otherwise known as Luke Feenan. So CC Hyper is a British guy who was contracted by EA over the past 12 months to officially research improvements to many of the C&C Ultimate Collection games. He's worked with EA since as far back as 2019, but this last year has fully focused on this current update. So he had full access to the C&C archive at EA, and after a lot of hard work from many people in the company, including months of engineering work and with more than 50 people involved in getting this over the line, he has ultimately delivered as a patch, and most importantly, the source code for the game, which we're going to explain what that means for us later. Last night, CC Hyper joined a Discord voice chat and he was answering questions from the community for over 5 hours, which I had the pleasure to listen to 99% of. During this chat, we learned loads of cool stuff regarding different Command & Conquers, how the project came to be, and we discussed what this could mean for the future of Command & Conquer Generals Zero Hour. Of course, it went on for over 5 hours, so I'm not going to list absolutely everything that was discussed, but I am going to mention some key points and break down in simple terms what I think it can mean for Generals Zero Hour in the future. So firstly, let's cover the most important and crazy thing, which is the release of the source code to the public. So you can find this over on GitHub. It's all there. People have been delving into it already and finding all kinds of funny notes, but the link to it is in the description. So for those of you that are wondering what source code even is or what it can mean for us, it's basically the underlying set of instructions written in a programming language, which in this case is C++, if you know anything about programming, that tells the computer to how to run and function every aspect of a video game. So it's like a blueprint for the game's mechanics, graphics, gameplay elements, the raw code that developers use to create a game, and which is the place that you can modify and further develop a game. So in terms of what that might mean for us exactly in the future, firstly, you need to think about the big annoying stuff that we currently face in the game. So for example, fixing mismatches, fixing serious errors, crashes when there's too many units on the map, fixing glitches, the AI waypointing around mountains and around water that leads to crazy lag when you've got 7 AIs in the same game as you, fixing the connection issues, fixing pings, fixing the weird bugs like the China supply trucks messing up when you get mines on your building and they do all kinds of crazy paths, and fixing bugged out terrorists where they just kind of freeze, or you can also fix the giant flying unstoppable scud storms. So despite not being a programmer myself, these are the type of things that I understand that could eventually be fixed with the release of this source code, which is why it's so important. My belief, firstly, is that the community of developers such as Zazon, who I know will be looking through the source code even right now, should try to get the game in a good state. So think of all those bugs and all those problems that I just listed. So once you've done that, you could then look at other things such as new features. You could have things like in the lobby before you start a match, you could tick a box that implements pro rules for everyone rather than having to type it out like crazy and then people breaking the rules. You could look at things like enhanced graphics. You could look at changing it from peer-to-peer connection, so joining a server instead, whether that would be possible. Creating new game servers. You could look at having a quick match function, having a ladder function, having matches with more than 8 players. I mean, can you imagine a world where we have 20 players and the latency is at 10 or even lower? I'm hearing the latency might be even possible to have at 1, bearing in mind that the current state of the game is minimum 10. So I know that eventually the hot topic of balance will come up. I think it already has actually. And I do think this should be prioritized for now. Given that there's so many bugs and issues to fix inside of the game, I think they should be prioritized. And it's also got to be taken into account that fixing the bugs, the glitches, all the issues like that does slightly impact the balance anyway. So I think the game needs to be got into a good position first before you start looking at balance. But when the topic of balance does ultimately come up, my suggestion would be to gather a council of probably something like the top 15 players inside of the game and discuss in detail each change and ultimately get them signed off in an agreement with most of the other people in that council. It's extremely important that everybody involved remembers that due to the 12 different armies inside of the game, it's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. When you're just changing one part of the Rubik's Cube, you're actually changing multiple other parts of the Rubik's Cube possibly as well. So it has to be taken into account that because there's so many armies, just changing one small part of one faction can change multiple matchups. So from all the news, definitely I think the Generals Zero Hour source code being released is the biggest thing to note. And this means that Zezon's project, where he was reverse engineering the game code through Project Thyme, does come to an end. So I believe he spent a good 5 solid months on that. But you could also look at it that he was going to spend many more years on that. And now that project is just done. He has the original game code. So I saw his reaction on his channel where he cried or almost cried when this got released. He didn't believe it, and it was absolutely amazing for him, just as it is for everyone else. One thing to mention here that I know some people will already be thinking about and already be worried about is potential bad actors and people who wish to cheat now that they have access to the game's code. However, this topic did come up in our 5-hour Discord call last night with C&C Hyper, and he mentioned that to combat this, some of the libraries have been removed from the game code. So obviously, I'm not a programmer. I don't know entirely what this means, but apparently it's going to be really hard for a potential bad actor or cheater to rebuild those libraries and then ultimately use it for cheating. But there are also maybe anti-cheat strategies we can put in place. So if you do notice in the future, in the years to come or the months to come, anyone cheating, we can report it back to Zezon, maybe C&C Hyper, and we can come up with anti-cheat strategies that we can put in place to prevent this from happening. So next, I want to mention the patch 1.05, which has been pushed to Steam and the EA app versions of the game. From speaking to C&C Hyper, this patch now implements full Steam Workshop support for Steam versions of the game. To support this, it also adds a custom mission button to the main game menu to support custom missions when you add them from the Steam Workshop. The patch also fixes some random oddities in the code, which could help reduce the chance of random crashes. At the time of recording this video, I actually haven't installed the new patch, as I believe it does cause issues with the current version of DoMiNaToR, which I think Zezon is working on probably right now as a priority. But I do think if you give it a few more days, I think all of this should end up working out together, and there probably will be a new version of DoMiNaToR. Also, it's very important to note that apparently 1.04 and 1.05 versions do work together just fine without any mismatches. This is what C&C Hyper said. Of course, this does need further testing, so if you notice any issues with maybe recurring mismatches or significantly more mismatches, then of course report it and let us know down in the comments. Okay, so next let's talk about the old archive footage that has been posted on the official Command & Conquer YouTube channel. Here you can find extremely early testing of the game's engine, so the Sage engine, from around 2001 time, I believe. You'll notice it looks significantly different to how the game looks today, and even all of the units are different. And so from what I understand from looking at this footage, at times they were testing the engine with other models from other games. It's really interesting to see, and it shows just what it was like in the very early days. Within this video, you'll also find archived footage from Renegade, so some of you may wish to check that out as well. But if you want to look just at the Zero Hour stuff, you can find it on their YouTube channel, which I'll leave a link to in the description. And if you look around the 3 to 11 minute mark, plus a few other marks, I'll leave the timestamps below. You can find all the Zero Hour footage. It is mixed with the Renegade stuff. So as I mentioned, Steam Workshop now works for Generals Zero Hour, and if you are interested in the other games, then it also now works for C&C Renegade, C&C 3 Tiberium Wars and Kane's Wrath, Red Alert 3 and Uprising, and also C&C 4 Tiberium Twilight. Personally, I don't really use the Steam Workshop that much. I have on maybe 1 or 2 games in the past, but I do know that it can make it very easy for people to install things like new maps. So that's exactly what it is going to do for Generals Zero Hour. The mission editor, the world builder, have received updates so that people can publish their maps directly from there to the Steam Workshop. And what I'm hoping for is that this generates a wave of mappers creating new and amazing maps, thinking like 1v1 maps, team game maps, art of defenses. So I'll be keeping an eye on that section going forward and seeing what wacky and wonderful stuff appears. So to top that off, EA have also released the C&C modding support pack, which includes source XML, schema, script, shader, and map files for all of the games that use the Sage engine. People have apparently been asking for this for 15 years, and now it's finally happened. You can find this support pack at the EA GitHub page, which I'll link to in the description. So yeah, definitely last night was a night I didn't expect. It was a really weird night, staying up for 5 hours or over 5 hours on a Discord voice chat, listening to a bunch of guys chat about Zero Hour until 2:30 in the morning, listening to C&C Hyper answering loads of questions from the community, which is really amazing, really an experience in itself. He mentioned about how he started working back with EA in 2019, how he's a contractor now, he's not indefinitely with EA, but he does hope to continue to work with them, and that he's a community veteran and he's been a huge fan of the games for many, many years. And his whole goal was to basically try and get the franchise back to where it should be. So I did hear some further detail, like how Hyper has basically sat as an attachment to the commercial team at EA. He's directly worked with Jim, who's a close friend of his, and he explained that EA ultimately is a publicly traded company, and anything that they do has to make commercial sense and ultimately generate money, just as any other business. We talked about how purchasing the game over on Steam, where you can currently get 70% off for all of the Command & Conquer games, which means you can get all of the games for like $6, which is really, really insane when you think about it. That's probably the best way that you can support the franchise, support EA, and then who knows what the future might hold if we get the numbers right up. Some other random topics that came up that I'll share with you here now were the release of the 2 missing boss generals. Someone basically asked this as a question. It's really amazing how he just answered 5 hours of questions, by the way. He sat there with about 3 or 4 beers just answering questions from myself and from other community people. And yeah, the topic of 2 boss generals came up. So you'll know inside of the game, you've got the China one that got released, the General Ling, and that is actually in the game. But General Ironside, which is the US one, and the General Deathstrike, which is the GLA one, they're inside of the game files, but they never actually made it to final release. I don't know if they got rushed or for whatever reason. So someone was basically asking, could we ever get them back? Could they get released? But C&C Hyper did mention there could be issues such as the voice lines may have royalties to be paid to the actors if they did get released, and then that would cost EA money. They'd be paying out to try and release those. So unlikely that might happen, but it's just a fun little fact there for you. One other topic did get mentioned, which was Tempest Rising, which is another RTS that's about to get released. There's a lot of hype around it. It's a bit like Command & Conquer. And yeah, it got mentioned, and C&C Hyper said that he actually was involved with it back in the day, and he actually created the logo for Tempest Rising. And he also came up with a poster design for it as well. So when you have a look at the Tempest Rising poster, it's actually got a bit of a Generals and Command & Conquer feel to it. And now when you look at it, you can really see the resemblance. I thought that was a little interesting fact there for you. So going forward, I do plan to do a podcast style live stream on my channel. So I'm thinking about getting the likes of people like Zezon. Maybe C&C Hyper would agree to it. Maybe Legionnaire. Yeah, who would have guessed Legionnaire on the channel? To discuss realistic possibilities for the game and to get an idea of timelines. Because I know everyone, including myself, will now be like, oh, how fast are we going to be able to fix mismatches? How fast are we going to be able to get the ping down for everyone, or install servers, or get quick match back? There's going to be so many questions, including from myself as well, but also from viewers. So yeah, I'm hoping to do that on the channel, and we'll make it with a 0 delay, and you can ask questions, and we'll try to answer everything in the chat. So yeah, watch this space. It could be as early as Sunday. So this Sunday around 1 p.m. GMT. So yeah, watch this space. It's still to be fully arranged. So that brings me to the end. All in all, yesterday was one of the most amazing days, maybe you could say, in my life. I don't know if that sounds sad or not. A big part of my life is gaming. I've been playing games since I was very, very young, and Zero Hour, I've been making videos over on YouTube since 2015, so we're like 10 years in now. So yeah, honestly, it was one of the most amazing days. I do look forward to seeing where the game can go from here, and who knows, maybe in the future, I'll see you in a 64-player battle royale with an amazing ping sooner rather than later. So GG, and thanks for listening.